Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Paterson, published in 1977. As usual, there will be spoilers. Unlike the usual, at least up until this point, I'm wearing short sleeves, which is different. I'm a very structured individual, so I don't like switching things up with my videos here, but it's summer and this room, it gets pretty hot. Now that I am wearing this though, I might just stick with it. Who knows? Also got rid of my desk over here, so got more space. Moving on, the plot is very straightforward. This is about a 10-year-old boy named Jess Aarons who befriends his new neighbor, Leslie, and together the two, they create this magical kingdom in the forest. Then she dies. To start off, this is a well-written story, maybe too well-written, given that the protagonist is this 5th grader, but it's not distractingly eloquent, and Jess is not the narrator per se. He doesn't come off as being abnormally smart either. That's a big plus for me. As much as I admire Orson Scott Card and John Green, I rarely buy into their characters being as young as they're supposed to be. Not every child is a genius. Though Leslie might be a 9-year-old who's read Moby Dick, that's at the very least impressive, even accounting for the fact that both of her parents are writers. I should probably read that book as well at some point, but I haven't. I really like the way that Leslie's death was handled, the wide range of emotions that we get from Jess. At first, he doesn't believe that she's dead. He's in denial. He's numb to what's happened. Then he breaks into anger and finally gut-wrenching sobs. Loss is a painful thing. It's even more painful when you feel partially responsible, and I can't imagine how painful it would be for someone to essentially lose their one and only friend, especially at this age. The way that chapter 12 ends with Jess curled up in his bed with Leslie's dog, PT, tucked in against his chest, the one that he gave her for Christmas, it just about brought me to tears. It's an emotional scene in an emotional book. But it does have an optimistic ending, with Jess inviting Maybelle to join him in Terabithia. He wants to live for both himself and Leslie. I thought that was a good way to end things. Jess is growing. This story, it plays with expectations. Leslie's favorite hobby is scuba diving. She doesn't fear the water, and she tries to break Jess's fear of it, yet she dies by falling into the creek. The school bully turns out to be an okay person. His teachers aren't soulless tyrants. The clash between ideologies was also interesting. Jess comes from a very old-fashioned family in an old-fashioned town. Leslie comes from the city and is quite liberal. She wears jeans, she keeps her hair cut quite short, her parents don't hold conventional jobs. It was interesting to look back at this cultural shift that was happening in the 70s, a time when parents beating their kids wasn't seen as all that surprising and was generally kept pretty close to the vest, and where many were quite sheltered from global issues. Almost all the focus is on Jess and Leslie, but the details that we do get from the other characters are enough to keep things moving forward. And Maybelle's great. She's not yet been beaten down by the realities of life, is what I would say if I were a pessimistic person. For a children's book, this is pretty dark. I'm not sure I could picture myself as a kid reading this thing. It's quite sobering and really grounded. Is that a positive? I don't know, which is why I'm mentioning it here in the middle of my review. Now onto the negatives. I've said this before and I'm sure I'll say it again. This isn't my typical type of story, and I knew that going in. My favorite genre is probably fantasy, followed closely by science fiction. So this kind of grounded, small scale, very personal story, it's just not the type of thing I generally read. Another issue is that Jess is a 10-year-old boy. His immaturity, along with the immaturity of those around him, it shows. The issues he deals with are things I haven't dealt with in a very long time. Pranks, insults, school drama. Lastly, this book is pretty uneventful outside of Leslie's death. Jess is dealing with school friends. He helps his parents with farm chores. The early dramatic events involve getting beaten by Leslie in a race and Leslie not having a TV, I guess. Because of this, it's a tough book for me to rate. For the most part, I didn't find it all that captivating. It's fine but unremarkable, again, until Leslie dies. At that point, I couldn't put the book down. In conclusion, Bridge to Terabithia is a good book. I see why it won the Newbery Medal in 1978. This is a well-written, character-driven story that works. It captures what it's like to be young and the challenges, the emotions of coping with sudden loss. But again, it's not my favorite genre, and I found the majority of the book to be just so-so until that ending. And what the heck, I'll give it 5 out of 5 stars. The ending really worked for me, and the rest of it wasn't bad. It was slow, but I think that worked to the story's advantage. Jess is a normal kid dealing with very kid issues until that tragic shift takes place. My ratings are pretty simple. 3 stars means I managed to finish a book, but I didn't especially like it. 4 stars means I liked the book overall, and then 5 stars means I loved it. And this was one that made me think and reflect. And yeah, I think that warrants a 5-star rating. Also, before I go, I've heard that the movie adaptation is pretty good, and I did start to watch it at one point, but I fell asleep, so I can't really comment on it. Maybe I'll give it another shot sometime. Anyway, that's all I've got. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Peace.